Simon exclaimed, "Oh, come on now, no way. What have you been drinking?" Tony, smiling, just said a little sarcastically, Yeah, of course you have." Reaching into his pocket, the professor quietly said, "There should be a picture of where I went on my cell phone. Do take a look." Simon grabbed the phone and looked at the last picture. "No way." Then he stuttered, "Where is that?" Tony, leaning over to get a good look, exclaimed, "Well, that's not England for sure." The professor handed over Charles Dickens' book, The Tale of Two Cities. He asked, "Do you recognize the building?" Tony, almost speechless, stutters, "It's the same. It's the Bastille." The professor asked, "What year does the picture look like?" "It has to be no later than 1789, which was the year the Bastille was demolished." Simon just said, "How can this be?" He was thinking to himself that the professor must have traveled over a film production set without realizing. The professor dug into his pocket, bringing out the warm, glowing globe, and answered, "With this." Everyone started talking at once until finally the professor banged the table with his hand, saying, "Enough!" He then explained to his two incredulous assistants what had transpired. The professor went on to explain that the flight was a test flight for a more adventurous trip. He wanted to try to go back to an early time, some 40,000 years earlier, if possible, when Aborigines first arrived in Australia after walking from the African continent. When he finished, they were both speechless. It was a few minutes before Simon picked up the globe. Looking carefully at its ornate inscriptions, he noticed a number of tiny lenses that were partially hidden. He handed the globe to Tony so he too could touch and feel this mysterious object. Meanwhile, Simon walked out of the kitchen into the library. The room was filled with bookshelves on all the available walls from floor to ceiling, arranged in typical library fashion. Simon soon found the book he was looking for, Myths and Legends of the Australian Aborigines. Grabbing the book, he went back to the kitchen where the professor and Tony were in a deep discussion about time travel. The professor, trying to explain that it was possible that Einstein, Galileo, Maxwell, Tesla, and the latest quantum physics tests had shown that as you reach and exceed the speed of light, it was technically possible to arrive before you had left. Perhaps this could explain how he had just traveled back in time. Tony was extremely skeptical, not fully understanding how it was possible to travel back in time. The professor suggested that this discussion could be for another time, as he needed to think of a better way to explain the concept to him. Tony agreed. Simon had placed the copy of Myths and Legends of the Australian Aborigines on the table and was flipping through the pages. Soon he found what he was looking for, the history of the Aborigines. Turning to the page, he then asked the professor to bring his globe over and do whatever he did before. The professor brought the globe over, rotating it so that the same spot was over the date and place relating to the Aborigines' arrival in Australia. All of a sudden, the globe sent out a ray of green light that then turned blue as it fell on the information. At the same time, the globe was warming up. The light started changing to a deep red as all the information was passed over. Their eyes all swelled to the size of saucers. The professor exclaimed, "This was exactly how the flight started." He had shown the light that emitted from the globe over the picture of the Bastille in 1789. The green light had altered to blue at first, and then becoming a deep red as it traveled over the picture. In the balloon, He ascended into the light cloud, but had no idea he had actually vanished from their sight. When he saw the globe change back to a green from a red light, he decided to descend through the cloud. He had then found himself over the Bastille in what looked like another time. There were no roads, no cars, and no skyscrapers. The people were walking or riding horses, or traveling in horse-drawn carriages and carts. He decided that he really didn't want to land in another time or place just yet. So he had quickly found his current Jeppesen flight charts for Meofum, picked up the globe and placed it on the map. The green light again changed to blue, finally turning deep red as it traveled over the chart of Meofum green. As the globe quickly changed to green again, he had started to descend. He then found that he was indeed back over Meofum in what looked like the present time. So he landed in the field next to Farmer Jones's timber barn, in nearby Culverstone. Simon then said, "So, Professor, would you like to travel back to Aborigines' Dreamtime?" "Well, absolutely yes, wouldn't you?" Both Tony and Simon said, "No, thank you, not really." The professor asked them both if either would like to try and travel back in time. He knew it might be harder to travel forward as there were no documents available from the future, as far as he knew, for the globe to read with its special light. They both thought about that for a moment and agreed it might be fun to travel a little way back in time. As the thought of traveling so far back in time was too much for the two of them to comprehend, they asked if they could try a shorter trip back, say of 50 years or so. Simon, a Beatle fan, remembered the last live performance the group played. It was on top of the Apple Records building in Savile Row, London on January 30th, 1969. One of the all-time greatest moments in pop culture. It ended with John Lennon saying, "I'd like to thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves, and I hope we pass the audition." They all quickly agreed that would be a fantastic test of the mysterious globe. Simon quickly found an article that detailed the whole event. The professor then took out the globe, remembering that he had already shown it the Aborigines' picture from 46,200 years earlier. He reset the globe like the last time. He found his Jeppesen flight chart of Meofum and placed the globe over it and, sure enough, the globe shone its beam of green light. As before, it turned to blue as it scanned the area of Meofum on the map, before finally turning deep red. Feeling confident that this had reset the globe, the professor motioned to Simon to bring the article about the Beatles' last live performance. The professor placed the globe on the document. Again, the globe sent out a green light first. Then, as it read the details, Beatles 1969, 3 Savile Row, London, it changed to a blue beam. As it warmed up noticeably, the beam changed to deep red. They all decided to take the flight the next day to test if the globe recalled this information. With their upcoming adventure in mind, Tony and Simon went out to the barn to prepare. They needed to recharge the propane tanks at the local shop, check the gondola, and perhaps even recharge the small battery they used for communications, height, and direction. The professor checked the weather and decided that an early morning flight would be perfect. When Tony and Simon returned a few hours later, the professor suggested a 7 a.m. flight, to which they agreed. The schedule decided, they all went home for an early night's sleep so they could commence the flight fully refreshed in the morning. Simon arrived home early to a surprised wife. Tina asked him why he was so early. He mumbled something about a 7 a.m. flight with the professor. "We'll need Jim Smith from Culverstone to act as my stand-in." "Why is that?" asked Tina. "Oh, just some new equipment we want to test," he answered. Tony was also home early for a change. His wife Samantha was delighted and was all for visiting the pub. When Tony told her he had to be in bed early for his morning flight, she was most put out, eventually persuading him to at least have one round of drinks before turning in for the night. The professor wasn't married. His lady friend Caroline, another professor, well, more of a scientist actually, usually only appeared on weekends, preferring to avoid all his grown-up toys, as she put it. This allowed the professor to carry out more research, which suited him very well. He too turned in early, as he wanted to make as many observations of events the next morning as possible. 5 a.m. arrives way too quickly, no matter the project in hand. Alarm clocks jangle away while wives, girlfriends, and pets complain loudly about being awakened so early.